My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 33. And for years, Christmas in my parents' mansion looked perfect from the outside. Guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos, my father raised his glass beneath the chandeliers, and my sister Adriana sat at the center shining like the jewel of the family. But while the photographs captured laughter and toasts, I was hidden in the kitchen, cooking feast after feast as if I were hired help. 5 years went by that way, my hands in flour and fire, while my face disappeared from every memory. Until one night something inside me snapped, and the silence I had carried finally gave way. What happens when the daughter who has been erased decides she will no longer play her part? Stay with me because this is the Christmas they never saw coming. Let me take you back to where it began. The gravy spoons slipped from my hand and clattered against the tiled floor, splashing brown sauce across my apron. I froze, staring at the mess spreading across the hem of my sweater, while from the dining room came the sound of laughter glasses clinking and my father's booming voice. They had started without me. I stayed crouched there for a moment, my knees pressed into the cold tile, the smell of roasted turkey heavy in the air. From where I knelt, I could see through the open doorway into the dining room. The chandelier sparkled above the polished table set with crystal and china, the kind of scene that should have felt warm and welcoming. Instead, it looked like a stage where everyone else belonged but me. My sister Adriana sat at the center wearing a silk emerald dress that caught the light every time she moved her hand. Father leaned toward her, his face glowing with pride. Mother sat beside him, nodding, touching Adriana's arm, with that smile she reserved only for her. The guests, men in tailored suits and women in diamonds, hung on Adriana's every word as if she were the star of the evening. I glanced down at my hands, red from hours of chopping and basting. The gravy I had simmered all morning had ended up on the floor, wasted, while my family toasted without me. My chest tightened. For 5 years, this scene had repeated itself. I cooked, I cleaned, I prepared while they smiled for photographs, lifted their glasses, and praised my sister. I grabbed a dish towel and wiped my hands. The clock on the oven read 7:15. Dinner had officially begun, and I was still in the kitchen. My mother's heels clicked against the marble floor before she appeared at the doorway. She peeked in her eyes, scanning the counter full of food. "Lauren," she said, not even looking at me fully, "make sure you put out another tray of pastries for the guests. Adriana should not be running around tonight." Her words landed heavier than the spoon had. I pressed the towel into my hands and nodded without speaking. She was already gone before I could answer, her perfume lingering in the doorway. I looked back toward the dining room. The guests laughed as Father raised his glass. "To Adriana," he said, "our pride and joy. She makes us shine every year." A burst of applause followed. My stomach clenched, the muscles in my jaw tight. I wanted to walk out and scream that I had been up since dawn, that I had been the one seasoning the turkey, whipping the mashed potatoes, baking pies. Instead, I swallowed it all down like I had every other year. But something inside me shifted. I straightened my reflection, staring back at me from the oven door, eyes darker than I remembered. I wasn't a guest in this house. I was the labor. The silent chef. No one photographed the daughter, no one toasted. I set the tray of pastries on the counter, my fingers gripping the silver edge until my knuckles turned white. The hum of voices from the dining room grew louder. As the wine flowed, every laugh another reminder of where I stood. My sister's laugh rang out clear, sharp, triumphant. I drew in a long breath and exhaled slowly. Enough. I wiped the last streak of gravy from my apron, folded the towel, and placed it neatly on the counter. My hands were steady for the first time that day. I glanced once more at the glowing scene through the doorway, then turned back to the kitchen, my heart pounding with a new kind of rhythm. This year, I would not let myself disappear behind the swinging doors. I poured myself a glass of water, the cool liquid grounding me, and leaned against the counter. The night was just beginning, but in my chest I already knew the ending would not look like the years before. The spoon lay still on the floor, a small silver witness to my decision. I bent down and picked it up, rinsed it at the sink, and set it aside. My hands lingered under the running water longer than needed, as if washing away, not just gravy, but 5 years of exhaustion. My mind replayed each December the same instructions, the same dismissive smiles. My mother's voice echoed in my head telling me I was useful in the kitchen, while my sister was meant for the spotlight. I dried my hands and opened the oven door, checking the turkey once more. Golden skin crackled in the heat juices sizzling at the bottom of the pan. It smelled perfect, but it no longer felt like an accomplishment. It felt like a chain tying me to a role I never asked for. Through the doorway, I saw Adriana raise her glass, her smile wide as guests clapped. She looked like a queen receiving tribute. My father leaned closer, telling one of his colleagues how Adriana had been instrumental in a recent business dinner. I felt invisible, though the entire feast they were enjoying existed because of me. My Aunt Rachel caught my eye from the far end of the table. She gave me the smallest nod, subtle enough not to be noticed by anyone else. That single gesture sent warmth through me. At least one person in that room saw me. I pressed my palms against the counter to steady myself. The thought of walking out there demanding a seat almost pulled me forward, but years of silence kept my feet glued to the floor. My breath grew shallow, heart pounding harder than the clamor of forks against china. I forced myself to breathe deeply, tasting rosemary and garlic in the air. My hands trembled less, now steadied by something I had not allowed myself to feel before. Resolve. I poured a glass of wine, this time not water. The red liquid shimmered under the kitchen lights. I raised it slightly as if toasting my own quiet rebellion. The first sip burned but warmed me in a way that felt right. I stayed there listening, letting their voices wash over me without letting them drown me this time. I knew the years had led to this moment. The spoon on the floor, the laughter without me, the photographs that would never include my face. For the first time, I realized I had a choice. The turkey would finish cooking in 40 minutes. The pies were cooling on the counter, their sweet scent filling the room. Everything was ready, yet I no longer felt obligated to serve it. I looked at the door again, not with longing this time, but with clarity. My place was not in that room if it meant erasing myself. I had given them 5 years. Tonight was already different, even if they didn't know it yet. I sipped the wine, slowly set the glass down, and straightened my shoulders. The sound of my sister's laughter rang out once more, but this time it didn't pierce me. It echoed like background noise to a decision I had already made in silence. The night stretched ahead, and for the first time in years, it felt like mine. It had been 5 years since that first December, when everything shifted, though at the time I told myself it was only temporary. Back in 2018, when my parents called me home to Palm Beach a week before Christmas, I was flattered. I thought maybe they wanted to spend extra time with me, that they missed me in a way they never said out loud. The reality was different. I had driven down from Orlando after work, my car trunk filled with gifts I had carefully wrapped. My boss had been generous enough to let me take a few extra days off. I imagined cozy evenings by the fire, catching up with my parents, maybe even taking Adriana shopping for last-minute presents, like when we were kids. Instead, when I arrived, Mother greeted me with a list. Not a gentle suggestion, but a typed, itemized schedule clipped to a folder. Turkey pies, casseroles, appetizers, all organized by day and time. She said it with a smile, as if she were doing me a favor, telling me I was so talented in the kitchen that no one else could pull off the Christmas banquet. I remember staring at that list, the neat bullet points that reduced my holiday to oven temperatures and serving times. Adriana breezed into the room right then, wearing a cashmere sweater and talking about some gala she was attending with Father's business partners. Mother handed her a glass of champagne and told me to get started on the cranberry relish. By the second night, I realized what I had signed up for. I chopped vegetables until my knuckles ached. I rolled pie crusts from dawn to midnight. I polished silverware while Adriana tried on dresses in front of the full-length mirror, asking Mother which shade looked best under the dining room chandelier. I wanted to tell her that every shade looked fine if you never had to touch a pot or pan. On Christmas Eve, I had planned to meet friends in West Palm for drinks. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, a rare chance to feel young and free. Father stopped me at the door, his hand firm on my shoulder. He said the guests were arriving earlier than expected and I was needed in the kitchen. His tone made it clear this was not optional. I remember texting my friends canceling at the last minute, promising I would make it up to them. They sent back little heart emojis and told me not to worry, but my throat burned as I put my phone away and tied on the apron again. The night stretched on with laughter spilling in from the dining room. I carried trays in and out, balancing dishes heavier than I was comfortable with, while the guests complimented Adriana's style, her poise, her charm. Not one person looked my way. When I finally slipped into the hallway, leaning against the wall to catch my breath, Adriana was standing with a glass of wine, surrounded by father's colleagues. She gestured at the roast on the table and said it had been her idea to add the rosemary. They nodded approvingly. I felt heat rise to my face because I had been the one to experiment with herbs that morning, adjusting until the flavor was right. I almost spoke up, almost told them the truth. But then I saw Mother watching me from across the room, her expression sharp. I turned back into the kitchen, the words dissolving in my throat. Later that night, as I scrubbed pans coated in grease, I overheard Father making a toast. To Adriana, he said, "May she always keep this family together." Applause erupted. I stood at the sink water, scalding my hands, and listened to the cheer that was never for me. The next morning was Christmas Day. The sun streamed in through the tall windows as wrapping paper littered the living room floor. Adriana opened a bracelet from Cartier, Father, sliding the velvet box across the table with pride. I unwrapped a new set of mixing bowls. Mother clapped her hands, telling me she knew I would love them since I spent so much time cooking. I smiled politely, but inside I felt something sharp lodge itself in my chest. It was not about the bracelet or the bowls. It was the message that my place had been decided without me. Adriana sparkled in the spotlight while I was handed the tools to stay in the kitchen. That afternoon, as I packed my car to return to Orlando, Mother hugged me briefly. She told me how grateful she was that I had made the holiday perfect. She promised everyone would remember what a wonderful celebration it had been. I knew she meant everyone would remember Adriana laughing under the chandelier, Father giving his toast, the guests sipping their wine. No one would remember the woman who spent 3 days bent over the stove. I drove away with the scent of turkey still clinging to my clothes. The radio played cheerful carols, but I turned it off. The quiet was easier to bear than the reminder of how invisible I had become. That first year set the pattern. I told myself it was only because Adriana had been busy that maybe next time things would balance out. I wanted to believe my parents loved us equally, that I just happened to be good at cooking and organizing. But deep down, I knew the truth. The truth was that my parents saw Adriana as the jewel of the Mitchell family, the daughter who would carry their name into society dinners and charity galas. And they saw me as reliable, steady, useful, the one who kept the wheels turning so the show looked flawless from the outside. That was the year the role of Christmas chef was handed to me without my consent, and once it was mine, there was no giving it back. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I thought about it now, years later, standing again in that same kitchen with the smell of gravy and garlic thick in the air. That first December was supposed to be special, but it had been the beginning of my disappearance. The night in front of me in 2022 felt heavy with the weight of every December that came before. I realized how much of myself I had given away one Christmas after another, and how much more I stood to lose if I stayed silent again. The memory of that first list my mother handed me burned in my mind. The neat columns of recipes, the highlighted reminders, the way she had said it was because I was talented. I had believed her then. Now I saw it for what it really was, a cage dressed up as praise. And standing in that kitchen 5 years later, I finally understood that the door had always been open. I simply had to decide to walk through it. Christmas of 2019 came with more weight than the one before, not only because I knew what was expected of me, but because my own birthday landed on Christmas Eve. I turned 30 that year, an age that felt important, a milestone that deserved a little recognition. I told myself it might be different, that maybe my parents would notice, maybe my sister would even remember to say something. I was wrong. The week before, I had mentioned casually on the family group text that I was looking forward to celebrating both my birthday and Christmas. The message got one short reply from my mother, a thumbs-up emoji. Adriana never responded. My father wrote only to remind me to pick up a specific brand of wine on my way down from Orlando. When I arrived at the estate, the house was glowing with decorations. The tree sparkled in the front window garland, wrapped the staircase, and Adriana's laughter carried down the hall before I even set my suitcase in the guest room. She was standing near the fireplace, in a red velvet dress, showing it off to my parents. Father told her she looked radiant. Mother told her she was the image of elegance. Neither of them looked at me when I came in, dragging my bag behind me. Mother pressed another list into my hand before I could take off my coat. She reminded me that we had important guests this year, and the dinner had to be perfect. I glanced down at the paper and saw no mention of my birthday, only times for glazing hams, instructions for sides, and reminders to polish the serving trays. I felt a lump rise in my throat but forced myself to smile. That evening, while I was in the kitchen prepping vegetables, Adriana floated in wearing heels and perfume. She perched on a stool, sipping wine, and told me about a gala she was attending in Miami the following week. She said Father was going to introduce her to a developer who might help her with a new project. I kept chopping carrots, the knife thudding against the cutting board, while she talked about how exhausting it was to always be in demand. I wanted to ask if she knew what exhausting really meant, if she had ever stood in front of a stove for 12 hours, while people outside toasted her accomplishments. Instead, I stayed quiet. She finished her wine and kissed me on the cheek before leaving to get ready for another party. The smell of her perfume lingered long after she was gone. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke before sunrise to get the turkey in the oven. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen was hot, my hair sticking to my forehead, my back aching. I told myself to push through because at least that night was special. I was 30. Surely they would notice. As the guests arrived, I balanced trays of hors d'oeuvres through the crowd. I heard my name once or twice when someone asked Mother who had prepared the food. Each time she answered with a wave of her hand that her daughter had helped. Then she would guide them back to Adriana, who was showing off a diamond bracelet she claimed was a gift from a grateful client. By the time dinner was served, the dining room buzzed with chatter. I carried out the roast, placed it on the table, and stepped back into the shadows. Father stood and lifted his glass. I braced myself, thinking maybe he would mention my birthday, maybe even say one sentence about me. Instead, he smiled at Adriana and told everyone how proud he was of her new role in the family company. He said she was already bringing in clients and building relationships that would secure their legacy. The guests clapped. I stood by the door holding an empty tray. The meal went on for hours. Every laugh, every toast, every camera flash seemed to center around Adriana. When the cake came out covered in frosting roses, I felt a flicker of hope. It was a beautiful cake, the kind I would have chosen for my birthday. But as the candles were lit, Mother leaned in and whispered that it was for Adriana, a way to celebrate her new position. Guests sang while Adriana leaned forward, her face glowing in the candlelight. I stood at the back of the room, forgotten my birthday erased. When she blew out the candles, the applause was loud enough to cover the sound of my heart breaking. Later, when the plates were cleared, Adriana waved her hand modestly and thanked everyone for their kindness. She told them she was lucky to be part of such a supportive family. The words felt like acid on my skin. No one looked at me, the one who had baked the cake, the one who had missed her own birthday party to serve hers. I escaped to the kitchen and pressed my palms against the counter. My chest hurt not from the work but from the silence. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual each second, a reminder that my 30th birthday had passed without a single acknowledgement. I wiped my eyes with the corner of my apron before going back out with coffee for the guests. Christmas morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter in the living room. Adriana was opening gifts, a new handbag from Father, pearl earrings from Mother. I unwrapped mine at the corner of the couch, a set of oven mitts decorated with holly leaves. Mother clapped her hands and said she knew I would love them since I was always in the kitchen. I forced a smile and said thank you. The rest of the day passed in a blur of dishes and cleanup. When I finally slid into the driver's seat of my car that evening, the bracelet on Adriana's wrist sparkled as she waved goodbye. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheels, staring at the house that had never felt less like home. The highway stretched ahead of me, the sky dark and clear. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend in Orlando asking how my birthday had gone. I stared at the screen, unable to type back. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and drove in silence, the ache in my chest heavier than the bags of leftovers in the trunk. That year taught me that expectations could erase even the most personal milestones. My 30th birthday disappeared into the glow of my sister's spotlight. I told myself I could handle it, that next year would be better. But deep down, I knew the pattern had only just begun. The memory of that night followed me into every December, after the taste of frosting and candle smoke tangled with the sting of being invisible. I never forgot how it felt to stand in a room full of people and realize not one of them saw me. And as I stood in the same kitchen years later, the turkey roasting in the oven once again, the weight of that lost birthday pressed against my ribs, reminding me how much had already been taken from me. Christmas of 2020 arrived with a heaviness I could feel in my bones. That was the year the world outside seemed to be falling apart, yet inside my parents' estate, the pressure to put on a flawless banquet never wavered. If anything, Mother insisted it mattered more than ever that our family had to project strength and polish when everyone else was struggling. I drove down from Orlando with the trunk of my car once again filled with groceries. I had spent half of my paycheck stocking up on ingredients Mother insisted were too important to leave to chance. Adriana didn't lift a finger. She pulled into the driveway at the same time I did, stepping out of her Lexus with a designer mask that matched her coat. Father rushed to help her carry her bags, while I balanced armfuls of flour, sugar, and roasting pans alone. Inside, the air smelled of pine and cinnamon. Mother already had carols playing from the grand piano. She barely greeted me before directing me toward the kitchen. "Adriana," she said warmly, "why don't you tell our guests later about your new promotion? Lauren, make sure the cranberry relish is perfect this year. Everyone looks forward to it." The cranberry relish had always been my specialty. I liked experimenting with oranges and spices, testing until the flavor felt balanced. It was one of the few dishes I was proud of, one that carried a piece of me in it. I spent hours simmering the berries, adding zest, tasting, adjusting. My hands were sticky from sugar, my apron splattered, but when I tasted the final spoonful, I knew it was good. It was mine. That evening, the dining room filled with voices again. I carried in trays, set them down, and stepped back as Father began introducing Adriana to a wealthy couple from Miami. He bragged about her skills in public relations, about how she would help the family business expand. Adriana smiled sweetly and brushed off the compliments as if they embarrassed her, though I could see the pride in her eyes. When the meal began, I served each dish one by one. I felt invisible again, but at least I had the relish. As the bowl was passed around, one of Father's guests took a spoonful and lit up. He said it was incredible, the best he had tasted. Others agreed, nodding, taking second helpings. My heart swelled for a moment. Then Mother's voice cut through. "Isn't Adriana talented? She always insists on the cranberries, and she has such a good palate." The words sank like stones. I glanced at Adriana, waiting for her to correct them, to say it was me who had been in the kitchen since morning, me who had stirred that pot until my arm ached. But she only smiled, lowered her lashes, and murmured that she was glad everyone enjoyed it. The guests clapped politely, some reaching across the table to touch her hand. I stood frozen, tray pressed against my chest. My cheeks burned so hot I thought the room must see it. Father raised his glass again and toasted Adriana for her creativity, for always knowing what the family needed. The guests echoed his words. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the tray. I slipped back into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, my breath shallow. The bowl of extra relish sat there untouched, glistening ruby red under the lights. I stared at it until the edges of my vision blurred. All I wanted was to walk and shout that it was mine, that Adriana had never boiled a pot of water in her life. But my throat closed. My voice had disappeared years ago, buried under lists and expectations. After dessert, when the guests lingered in the living room with brandy, I busied myself with dishes. Aunt Rachel wandered in holding her empty glass. She set it on the counter and touched my arm. "That cranberry dish was something special," she whispered. "I know it was yours." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I just nodded, afraid my voice would crack. She gave me a small smile before heading back to the others. That moment stayed with me, the only acknowledgement I received that night. Later, as I scrubbed the last pan, I heard Adriana laughing in the next room, her bracelets jingling as she gestured dramatically. Mother told the guests how Adriana had inherited her grandmother's gift for entertaining. I dried my hands, slowly staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. All I saw was someone who had given away her pride, piece by piece, every December. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, listening to the waves beyond the property line. My chest felt hollow. I thought of the relish, the one thing that carried my name, silently stripped away, as easily as wrapping paper on a gift. I promised myself that next year would be different, that I would find a way to hold on to something that was mine. As I stood years later in that same kitchen, the scent of turkey filling the air once again, I remembered the look on Adriana's face as she accepted praise for my work. The memory pressed down on me, heavy and unyielding, reminding me how much of myself I had lost each time I stayed silent. Christmas of 2021 carried a different kind of sting, one that cut deeper than forgotten birthdays or stolen recipes. That was the year I realized even the memories being recorded for the world to see did not include me. The house was lit brighter than ever. Father had insisted on professional decorators, and Mother had hired a photographer to capture the evening for her social media posts. Guests filed in wearing gowns and tuxedos, laughing as they shook off the December chill at the door. Adriana glided down the staircase in a silver sequin dress that shimmered with every step. Cameras flashed before she even reached the bottom. I was already in the kitchen rolling out dough for pies, my apron dusted with flour. From where I stood, I could see the photographer angling for shots, adjusting the chandelier lighting, telling Adriana to tilt her chin just so. I wiped my hands on a towel, hoping maybe he would wander in and capture the real work happening behind the scenes. He never did. Mother bustled into the kitchen at one point, her phone buzzing with notifications. "Lauren," she said briskly, "make sure the potatoes are whipped smooth, no lumps, and keep the rolls covered so they stay warm." Then she turned back toward the living room, her voice lifting with delight as she called out to Adriana. When the time came for dinner, I carried out the trays like always, setting them along the polished table before stepping back. The photographer was snapping picture after picture, capturing the laughter, the toasts, the sparkle of wine glasses raised high. I kept waiting for him to swing the camera toward me to even acknowledge my presence. He never did. After the main course, I returned to the kitchen to slice the pies. As I placed them carefully on serving platters, I heard the click of the camera again. I peeked through the doorway and saw Adriana leaning close to Father, both of them smiling broadly as guests clapped. Behind them, the photographer captured the perfect image of a golden family glowing under the chandelier. When I finally served dessert, I tried to stay near the edge of the room, hoping maybe I would appear in the background of a single picture. I balanced plates, smiled politely when guests thanked me, and edged closer to the group shot Mother was organizing near the tree. She waved for everyone to gather. I stepped forward, hesitant, holding a tray of coffee cups. Before I could put it down, Mother's hand landed lightly on my shoulder. She whispered that I should finish refilling glasses and not worry, the photographer would get plenty of shots. Then she steered me gently to the side. By the time I turned back, the flash had already gone off. Later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet except for the dishwasher humming, I wandered into the living room. The smell of pine was sharp, and wrapping paper still clung to the corners of the rug. Mother sat on the couch scrolling her iPad, her smile tight with satisfaction. I leaned over her shoulder and saw the fresh posts she had uploaded. Dozens of photos filled the screen, Adriana in the center of every frame. Adriana pouring wine, Adriana laughing with Father, Adriana standing gracefully beside the tree. I looked for myself, scanning each corner of every picture, and found only glimpses. The edge of my hand setting down a plate. The blur of my shoulder as I moved out of the frame. Never my face, My chest tightened. I asked softly if there were any photos with me in them. Mother looked up startled as if the question surprised her. She scrolled quickly, then smiled in a way that felt rehearsed. You were busy in the kitchen, sweetheart. You know you don't like being in pictures anyway. I wanted to protest, to tell her that I had never said that I wanted proof I was part of the family. But my throat closed the way it always did. Instead, I turned back into the kitchen and scrubbed the counters until my hands hurt. The next morning, while Adriana slept late, I walked through the house alone. The garland on the staircase glistened, the tree still twinkled, and the dining room table looked frozen in time. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness. I imagined all the pictures posted online, friends and acquaintances commenting about how beautiful the Mitchell family looked. No one would know I had been there. Before I loaded my car to drive back to Orlando, I paused at the door and glanced around the estate. The ocean glimmered beyond the lawn, the sunlight catching on the waves. For a moment, I thought about the little girl I used to be standing on that same patio dreaming about the future. She had believed her parents would always see her, that she mattered as much as her sister. As I slid behind the wheel, the weight of the previous night pressed on me. It was not just that my work had been overlooked, it was that my very existence had been erased from the record. My parents had chosen what story to tell, and it was one where I did not exist. Back on the highway, I drove in silence, my phone buzzing with alerts from Mother's posts. Each one carried Adriana's name, her smile, her sparkle. I ignored them all, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The year 2021 ended like that, with the knowledge that my family's legacy would be documented without me. And as another December crept closer, I knew something inside me had to change. The question was whether I would ever find the courage to let it. By December of 2022, the air around the Palm Beach estate felt different, though the decorations sparkled the same as always. I drove down from Orlando with a trunk full of ingredients, my hands tight on the wheel the entire way. Each mile brought back the memories of the past 4 years, the lists, the erasures, the stolen pride. This time, I knew exactly what to expect, and yet there was a restless energy in my chest that had not been there before. Mother greeted me at the door with her usual air of business. She pressed a folder into my hands, thicker than ever, pages tabbed with colored markers. Turkeys, pies, seafood appetizers, the timing of every course carefully mapped out. She smiled as if she had handed me a gift. Adriana swept in behind her, wearing a cream cashmere sweater, laughing, as Father carried her suitcase upstairs. She kissed Mother on the cheek and headed straight to the living room where the tree glowed in perfect symmetry. I dragged my own bag to the guest room, the same one I had slept in since childhood. The scent of lavender sachets filled the space, but it felt less like home than a hotel where I was always assigned the same corner room. When I returned to the kitchen, I opened the folder and let my eyes skim the lines. One note jumped out, highlighted in yellow: confirm menu with Adriana. By late afternoon, the kitchen was hot. I had been chopping and stirring since morning. Father's voice carried down the hallway, booming with laughter as he entertained an early guest in the den. Mother's heels clicked across the tile as she directed the decorators. Adriana lounged on the couch with her phone, showing off her new manicure, occasionally calling out for a refill of sparkling water. When I paused to catch my breath, I overheard them speaking in the dining room. The words cut through me sharper than the knife I held. Father asked if the paperwork for the trust had been finalized. Mother assured him everything was set, that the $12 million had been secured and would be placed entirely in Adriana's name. My name was never mentioned. The knife trembled in my hand as I set it on the counter. My chest burned. I leaned closer to the doorway, straining to hear. Mother's voice grew softer, almost secretive, but I caught the words clearly. We removed Lauren's name months ago. It is simpler this way. Adriana deserves it. I pressed my palm against the counter to steady myself. The air in the kitchen thickened until I could barely breathe. My ears rang with the sound of their voices, casually rewriting the future as if I were nothing more than an afterthought. I thought of the years I had given them, the holidays. I had carried on my back the dishes that bore my fingerprints, but never my name. I forced myself to return to the stove, stirring a pot of soup that suddenly smelled sour. My hands moved automatically while my mind spun. They had decided my worth was zero, that my role in the family ended at the kitchen door. Adriana entered the kitchen not long after, humming to herself. She glanced at the trays lined up, then leaned casually against the counter. "Did you get the crab cakes right this time?" she asked, "because Father's client loves them." I bit my tongue, nodding stiffly, the words I wanted to hurl locked behind my teeth. She reached for a spoon, dipped it into the cranberry sauce simmering on the stove, and tasted it with a satisfied hum. "Perfect," she said. "I will be sure to tell them it is exactly how I like it." Then she walked out, heels tapping against the marble, leaving me with the steam rising around me like smoke. As evening settled, the estate filled with people. Cars lined the driveway, lights blazed in every window. Guests in sequined gowns and dark suits spilled into the dining room, sipping cocktails and laughing as if nothing in the world could touch them. From the kitchen doorway, I saw Adriana gliding from group to group, Father introducing her as the future of Mitchell Realty, mother beaming beside her. I remained in the shadows, apron tied tight, watching the scene like a ghost. The turkey browned perfectly in the oven, the pies cooled on the counter, every dish timed to the second. My body followed the script, but my mind replayed the words about the trust over and over. $12 million. Removed my name months ago. Adriana deserves it. At one point, Aunt Rachel slipped quietly into the kitchen. She carried a glass of wine and set it down beside me. Her eyes searched mine, gentle and steady. "You look pale," she said softly. "Are you all right?" I forced a smile and told her I was fine, that the heat was just getting to me. She studied me a moment longer, then squeezed my arm. "Remember," she said, "you are not invisible to everyone." Then she left, her words lingering like a lifeline. The clock ticked closer to dinner. I pulled the turkey from the oven, its skin golden and crisp. The smell filled the room, rich and heavy. I set it on the counter and stared at it for a long time, the carving knife beside it gleaming under the lights. My reflection stared back at me from the blade, eyes darker, sharper than before. In the dining room, Father's voice rose again, calling for everyone to raise their glasses. I could not make out the words, but I knew Adriana's name was in them. An applause followed, the same sound that had haunted me every December. I stood rooted to the floor, the turkey steaming in front of me, the list spread open on the counter, the trust document I had never seen echoing in my ears. For the first time, the weight of it all did not push me down. It pushed me forward. The night was only beginning, but deep inside me, something had already broken free. At work in Orlando that fall, I had begun to feel something shift, long before I carried that turkey out of the oven. The office buzzed with talk of new clients, and for once my name was in the conversation. I had landed a contract with a mid-size real estate developer who needed a marketing overhaul, and the presentation I built sealed the deal. My boss clapped me on the back and said he had not seen a pitch that sharp in years. For days afterward, I carried that praise with me like a secret flame. I stayed late perfecting campaigns, not because I had to, but because I wanted to prove to myself I was more than the person my family saw. I was not just useful with a roasting pan or a pie crust. I could walk into a boardroom and have men twice my age nodding along to my ideas. Each success at work built a layer of confidence that years of silence at home had stripped away. One afternoon in November, Michael Chen stopped by my desk. He was a lawyer who handled contracts for several of our clients, someone I had met briefly at networking events. He leaned against the cubicle wall, smiling in that calm way of his, and told me he had heard about the campaign I had led. He asked if I would consider consulting on a side project he was advising. His tone was respectful, his interest genuine, and it startled me how quickly my throat tightened. I had grown so unused to being acknowledged that the simplest compliment hit me like a wave. I told him I would think about it. That night, I sat in my apartment with takeout boxes spread across the coffee table, staring at my laptop. The idea of people outside my family wanting me for my skills, my brain, not my ability to baste a turkey, filled me with a strange lightness. I drafted a few ideas just to see if I could, and before I knew it, I was smiling at the screen. As December approached, Mother's texts grew more insistent. She listed dishes she expected, times I needed to arrive, and a note to bring a few of my own serving trays since she had loaned hers out. I typed out a reply more than once telling her no, that I had my own life, but I always deleted it. Old habits die hard. Instead, I packed my car with groceries, balancing spreadsheets at work, while planning holiday menus in the back of my mind. At the office holiday party, Jessica from accounting cornered me near the punch bowl. She had a mischievous smile and a strand of tinsel tangled in her hair. She asked if I was finally going to take a break from playing family chef and do something for myself. I laughed too quickly, brushing it off, but she did not let it go. She reminded me that no one at work saw me as invisible, that people respected what I brought to the table. Her words echoed long after the music faded. Driving to Palm Beach a week later, I carried those voices with me. Michael's quiet belief in my ability, Jessica's teasing insistence that I deserved more, my boss's praise that still made my cheeks warm. They were proof of another world, a world where I was not erased. Back in the estate kitchen, I lined up trays of food while Adriana floated through the living room in a satin gown. She posed for pictures, hair shining, laughter bubbling like champagne. Father introduced her to another guest as the future of Mitchell Realty, and I felt my chest tighten. But this time the weight pressed differently. It no longer smothered me, it sharpened me. When I carried out the first course, a man at the end of the table looked up at me. He smiled and thanked me by name, saying he remembered me from a presentation his company had attended months before. I nearly dropped the tray. I nodded quickly, retreating before Mother could redirect the attention, but the recognition stayed with me. Someone at that table knew me outside of this kitchen. Later, as I wiped my hands on a towel, Aunt Rachel slipped into the kitchen again. She lowered her voice and said she had seen my campaign mentioned in the paper, that she had clipped the article. She told me she was proud, and I nearly broke down then and there. I whispered a thank you, my throat thick. The night stretched on as expected, laughter and toasts echoing through the halls. Adriana soaked in every compliment while Father glowed. Mother flitted about like a conductor, ensuring the performance dazzled. But with each dish I set down, I reminded myself that I had a life waiting in Orlando. I had contracts to manage, projects to lead, friends who saw me. Standing at the sink, steam rising from the pots, I realized I did not feel as trapped as before. The estate still weighed heavy, but I had proof that beyond its walls I was more than a shadow. The thought steadied me, kept me upright when Mother peeked in to remind me Adriana should not be burdened with chores. By the time dessert was served, the knot in my stomach had loosened. I no longer believed the applause outside those doors was the only sound that mattered. I had begun to hear other voices. Voices that reminded me I was capable, valued, and strong. As I leaned against the counter, wine glass in hand, the decision that had haunted me for years began to form. The lists, the roles, the invisibility no longer defined me. Something else did, and it was waiting for me just beyond this house. The dining room glowed with soft light that bounced off the polished silver and crystal. From the kitchen doorway, I could see the table arranged with military precision, every glass aligned, every plate reflecting the chandelier above. Adriana floated among the guests, her sequined gown catching the light, her laughter ringing out as if the night existed solely to celebrate her. Father's voice carried easily over the hum. He spoke of Adriana's new project, a luxury condo development in Miami Beach, and how proud he was that she had inherited his talent for vision. Guests leaned in, nodding, clapping, politely raising their glasses. I held a tray of roasted vegetables, the steam rising into my face, and felt like a servant in a uniform I never chose. I set the tray down, barely noticed, then retreated into the kitchen. My pulse raced. The heat from the oven wrapped around me like a shroud, and I leaned against the counter, my palms damp. Every year, the same scene repeated, only louder, more polished, as if the walls of that house worked harder each Christmas to remind me of my place. Adriana swept into the kitchen, without warning, her perfume arriving a second before she did. She perched on a stool, crossing her legs, and picked at a piece of bread from the counter. Her eyes flicked to the spread of food waiting to be carried out. "You should plate the lamb with more garnish," she said, Father's client is particular about presentation. I bit back the urge to laugh. She had never cooked a single lamb chop in her life yet. Here she was giving orders as if she were the head chef. My hand tightened on the knife I was using to chop parsley. I forced myself to set it down and turned away from her. Adriana continued oblivious. By the way, she added, Father said you should park your car down the street tomorrow, so the valet has room for the important guests. I stared at her, the words sinking into my chest. My car, a modest Toyota that I had worked hard to pay off, was apparently an eyesore among the luxury sedans they expected. Adriana looked at me as though she had said something helpful, then hopped off the stool and breezed out again, leaving the door swinging behind her. The knot in my stomach grew heavier. I carried out the next dish in silence, my steps careful, my smile fixed. Guests complimented the flavors. Father nodded approvingly, but each word was redirected toward Adriana. She accepted the praise, gracefully tilting her head, thanking them as though she had orchestrated the entire evening. From across the table, Aunt Rachel caught my eye. She gave the slightest shake of her head, a gesture of sympathy, of warning. That small recognition kept me from crumbling right there. Later, as I cleared plates, I heard Mother prompt Adriana. Tell them about your trip to New York, darling. Adriana launched into a story about meeting an investor at a rooftop bar, exaggerating her role until it sounded like she alone had secured the future of the family business. Laughter rippled around the table. I gripped the stack of plates so tightly I thought they might crack. Back in the kitchen, I sank into a chair, letting the noise of the party fade to a dull roar. My chest ached with a familiar weight. I glanced toward the glass door that led to the patio. Beyond it, the night sky stretched clear and endless, the ocean just a shadow in the distance. I wondered what it would feel like to walk out and keep going, to leave the lights and the applause behind. Aunt Rachel slipped in quietly. She placed her empty wine glass on the counter and leaned against the wall, studying me. You look like you could use some air, she said softly. I forced a smile, shook my head and told her I was fine. She didn't believe me, I could see it in her eyes, but she let it go. Before leaving, she touched my shoulder and whispered, You deserve better than this. Her words lingered long after she left. I stared at the stack of clean plates, at the half-empty glasses waiting to be filled, and realized how hollow it all was. The food, the decorations, the endless compliments thrown toward my sister. None of it meant anything outside those walls. The sound of applause swelled again, and curiosity pulled me back toward the doorway. Father stood raising his glass high, Adriana glowing at his side. He toasted her success, her grace, her future. Guests clapped, cameras flashed, and once again I was absent from the picture. I stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding. The scent of rosemary and garlic clung to my hands, proof of the hours I had poured into this feast. Yet I remained invisible, a silent shadow serving a family that had already erased me from their legacy. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. The deep red swirled in the glass as I lifted it to my lips. For the first time, I did not feel guilt for pausing, for choosing to taste something meant for me. The wine was bold, dry, and it burned down my throat, igniting something steadier than rage. The laughter outside continued, rising and falling like waves. I listened without moving my back, pressed to the counter, the glass warm in my hand. For years I had given them every ounce of myself, hoping for recognition that never came. Now, as the night carried on without me, I felt a shift deep in my chest. I set the glass down slowly and glanced once more through the doorway. Adriana tilted her head back, laughing, the chandelier light catching her earrings. My parents beamed, the perfect picture for the world to see. But in the quiet of the kitchen, surrounded by the dishes I had prepared, I knew I was no longer part of that image. The knowledge sat heavy yet clear, like the first note of a song that would not be silenced. Mother came into the kitchen later that night, her iPad tucked under one arm and her glass of wine in the other. She did not notice me at first, still scrolling through the screen, her lips curving into a satisfied smile at the flood of notifications. I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, my hands moving through the water automatically while my chest tightened. She finally looked up, tilting the screen toward me as though sharing a prize. Look at these, she said. Adriana looks stunning tonight. The photos showed my sister standing under the chandelier, her arm looped through Father's, her smile wide. Every image glowed with warmth and polish, a picture-perfect holiday. I searched quickly, scanning corners and reflections, hoping to see a glimpse of myself. I found only trays of food in the background, never my face. I asked quietly if she had posted any pictures of me. Mother blinked, her smile faltering for just a second. "You know you prefer to stay out of the spotlight," she replied already, turning back to the screen. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter, my voice low but steady. "That is not true. I have never said that." The room went still, the only sound, the faint echo of laughter from the dining room. Mother set the iPad down on the counter, folding her arms. She looked at me with that sharpness she reserved for when I stepped even an inch out of line. "Lauren, do not start. Tonight is about family, about presenting ourselves well." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Presenting ourselves well," I repeated. "That means presenting Adriana." She lifted her chin, her eyes flashing. "She is our future. You are being ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word hit me like a slap. My chest burned with a mix of rage and exhaustion. I had spent 5 years cooking, cleaning, erasing my own needs to make their holidays flawless, and somehow I was the ungrateful one. I wanted to shout until the walls shook. Instead, I straightened, meeting her eyes with a steadiness I had never shown before. I told her I would not keep doing this. For a moment, she looked stunned, as though the air had shifted. Then she laughed softly, dismissing it like a child's tantrum. "Of course you will," she said. "You always do." And then she picked up her iPad and left the kitchen, her heels clicking across the tile. My hands trembled as I gripped the counter. The smell of turkey and herbs clung to the air, heavy and suffocating. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of every year pressing down, every erased photo, every compliment stolen. For once, instead of folding under it, I felt myself rising. The door creaked open, and Aunt Rachel slipped in again, her expression careful. She had a way of appearing exactly when I needed someone to remind me I was not losing my mind. She looked at me closely and asked if I was all right. My throat tightened, but I nodded. She poured herself a small glass of wine from the counter and leaned closer. "I see how they treat you," she said quietly. "Do not think for a second that no one notices." I wanted to crumble into her arms to let her words wash away the years of silence. Instead, I swallowed hard and whispered, "Thank you." She touched my hand briefly before heading back out, leaving behind a comfort that lingered. The hours dragged on until the guests finally began to leave. I busied myself with leftovers, packing them into foil pans, scrubbing pans until my knuckles ached. Through the walls, I heard Father thanking Adriana's guests, praising her for her charm and talent. Mother's laughter followed, bright and sharp. By the time I finished, the house was quiet again. Adriana's heels clicked across the marble as she retreated upstairs, humming to herself. Father disappeared into his office. Mother lingered in the living room, humming as she scrolled through her iPad again, her fingers quick over the screen. I stood at the doorway watching her, the glow from the tablet lighting her face. She had chosen her story, the one where Adriana sparkled, and I did not exist. My chest rose with a steadiness I had never felt before. I knew I had said the words out loud to her, that I would not keep doing this. Now the question was whether I would act on them. I turned off the lights in the kitchen one by one. The counters gleamed, the ovens were silent, and the only evidence of my work was the lingering scent that filled the house. I climbed the stairs to the guest room, my footsteps quiet, my heart pounding with a rhythm that no longer felt like defeat. When I closed the door behind me, the weight of the night pressed into the silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. My hands still smelled faintly of garlic and rosemary, my apron hung over the chair, and the echo of Mother's words rang in my ears. "You always do." I whispered into the empty room, "Not this time." The morning came wrapped in silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you hear your own heartbeat. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of the guest room, soft and golden, as if the house itself had no memory of the night before. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my body heavy with exhaustion, but my mind sharp with resolve. Downstairs, faint clinks and laughter floated up. Adriana's voice rose above the rest, bright and careless, followed by Father's booming tone. Guests had stayed the night, and the family was already putting on another performance over brunch. I sat up slowly, my hands resting on my knees, and felt the calm that comes only after a storm. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee and buttered toast lingered, but I didn't reach for a plate. I looked at the rows of gleaming counters, the spotless sink, the piles of silver polished just hours ago. My reflection stared back at me from the oven door, pale but unflinching. By noon, the dining room was alive again. Guests gathered around the long table, Adriana seated at the center, her laughter chiming through the air. Father stood to give another toast, his glass raised high. I entered quietly carrying the turkey on its silver platter. The room fell silent for a brief moment as the scent filled the air. All eyes turned not to me but to the bird glistening under the light. I placed it firmly in the center of the table, the silver base, striking the wood with a solid sound. I set the carving knife beside it, then straightened my apron still tied at my waist. Mother looked up, her eyes flickering with impatience. "Lauren, would you slice it, please?" she said in that tone that was not a question. My hands did not move. I felt the heat of every gaze in the room. Slowly, I untied the apron, folded it, and set it across the back of the empty chair beside me. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. A ripple of confusion spread across the table. Adriana's smile faltered, her fork hovering midair. Father's face darkened, his hand tightening on the stem of his glass. "Excuse me," he said, his tone sharp. "Did you say no?" I met his eyes and repeated it. "Number." The silence was a living thing now, heavy and brittle. Mother laughed nervously, trying to smooth the moment. "Lauren is tired," she told the guests. "She doesn't mean it." But I did. I had never meant anything more. I stepped back from the table, my hands free for the first time in years. "I will not serve this family anymore." The words cracked through the room like glass shattering. Adriana's mouth opened, then closed, her cheeks flushing. Father set his glass down with a thud. "You will not embarrass us in front of our guests," he hissed. But the guests were already whispering, their eyes darting between me and the family at the head of the table. I saw doubt flicker in their expressions, a shift in the careful performance my parents had built. Mother's voice rose high and strained. "Sit down, Lauren. Do not make a scene." I straightened my shoulders and shook my head. "For 5 years I cooked and cleaned while you toasted, Adriana. For 5 years I was erased from your photographs and your stories. I am not invisible." The words hung there, undeniable, impossible to take back. Aunt Rachel's hand pressed lightly against the tablecloth, her eyes meeting mine with quiet strength. She gave the smallest nod, the only sign of support I needed. The guests began to murmur louder, a restless sound that spread like fire. One man shifted in his chair and asked Father quietly if everything was all right. Another leaned toward his wife, whispering behind his napkin. Father's jaw tightened, his face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to bark something else, but the moment had already slipped from his control. The room was no longer watching Adriana. It was watching me. I picked up my coat from the chair, sliding my arms into the sleeves with deliberate calm. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, my eyes sweeping the table. "You can carve your own turkey." The guests sat frozen, forks, suspended, mouths half open. Adriana's eyes darted to Father, waiting for him to fix it, but he only sat there, the knife still resting untouched beside the bird. I walked out of the dining room, each step echoing against the marble floors. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept moving past the glittering tree, past the photographs lined along the hallway that never bore my face. The front door opened easily beneath my hand, the cool air rushing in like a blessing. Behind me, I heard the faint swell of voices. Mother's sharp tone, Father's rising anger, the guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But I did not turn back. Outside, the December sun warmed my face. The driveway stretched before me, lined with sleek black cars that gleamed under the sky. My own modest Toyota waited at the curb, small among the giants, but it had carried me here, and it would carry me away. I slid behind the wheel, gripping it with hands that no longer shook. Through the windshield, I saw the reflection of the house, grand and perfect, its windows glowing with light. For years it had caged me. Now it was only a backdrop I was leaving behind. I turned the key, the engine humming steady and sure. My chest rose with a breath that felt like my first in years. As I pulled away, the mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its polished facade shrinking with every passing second. For the first time on Christmas Day, I was not thinking about serving anyone else. I was thinking about myself. The road stretched empty as I drove north toward Orlando, Christmas carols drifting faintly from the radio. I turned the volume down and let the silence fill the car instead. My hand stayed firm on the wheel, my heart beating fast but steady. The farther I got from Palm Beach, the lighter my chest felt, as if every mile peeled away another layer of chains I had carried for years. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sun was beginning to set streaks of pink and orange fading over the city. I sat for a moment with the engine running, and let the quiet wash over me. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I didn't have to look to know it was Mother. I switched it to silent, grabbed my bag, and walked inside. The warmth of my small apartment wrapped around me instantly. It smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle I had left burning the night before. I kicked off my shoes, set my coat across the back of a chair, and stood in the middle of the room. For once there was no list waiting, no clatter of dishes, no voices barking orders, just me. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and let myself breathe. My hands trembled slightly from adrenaline, but underneath was something calmer, firmer. I had walked out. I had said no. I had taken the step I had been afraid to take for 5 years. An hour later, my phone lit up again, this time with a string of messages. First from Mother, clipped and furious. "You embarrassed us. You ruined dinner. You will apologize tomorrow." Then Father's, shorter but heavier. "You will not behave like this again." And finally Adriana's, "You always make everything about you. Grow up." I set the phone face down and let their words sit where they belonged, outside the walls of my home. My chest hurt, but in a way that felt clean, like a wound being cauterized. The next morning the calls started. I ignored them all. By midday, Aunt Rachel left a voicemail. Her voice was low, steady, a balm. She told me she was proud of me, that she had never seen anyone at that table look stronger than I did when I put down that apron. Tears burned my eyes as I replayed her message, clutching the phone to my chest. At work a few days later, news of Christmas had already reached some of my colleagues. One of Father's clients, who had been at the dinner, happened to also be a client at our firm. Jessica from accounting slid into my cubicle with wide eyes. "Word is you walked out on the Mitchell holiday," she whispered. I braced myself for judgment, but instead she grinned. "Honestly, good for you. About time someone shook that family tree." Others offered quiet nods, pats on the shoulder, subtle acknowledgments that traveled like sparks. It stunned me how fast word had spread, how quickly people seemed to understand the truth even without me explaining. That night, Michael Chen called. His voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the curiosity. He said he had heard whispers about a scene at the Mitchell estate and asked gently if I was all right. I told him the truth, more truth than I had admitted to anyone in years. I told him about the 5 years of silence, the stolen credit, the erased photographs. He listened without interruption, then said simply, "I see you, Lauren." That sentence alone broke something open inside me. Days passed, and the silence from my parents grew louder. No apology, no olive branch, only the occasional sharp text demanding that I reconsider. Adriana posted glossy photos from the holiday, cropped carefully to hide the empty chair at the table. Comments poured in, praising her beauty, her poise, the perfect Mitchell Christmas. But those who had been there knew the truth. A handful of whispers trickled back to me through colleagues and acquaintances. Guests, unsettled clients questioning the shimmer of the Mitchell performance cracking. One evening, as I sat with Rachel in a cafe near my apartment, she leaned forward and told me Father had lost a small investor already. Apparently the man had been at dinner, had seen me stand up and leave, had heard the tension. "People talk," Rachel said, "and not always the way your parents hope." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the words sink in. I had not set out to humiliate them. I had only wanted to free myself. But there it was, the echo of karma circling back in ways I had not planned. Rachel touched my hand across the table. "They will fight this," she said, "because control is all they know. But you did the bravest thing you could do. You told them no." On the drive home that night, Christmas lights still twinkled across the city, strung over houses and trees. They glowed soft and steady, ordinary and beautiful. I realized for the first time in years that I could look at those lights and feel peace instead of dread. Back in my apartment, I hung up my coat and sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me. The silence was not heavy anymore. It was mine. My phone buzzed again, one more attempt from Mother. I let it go dark without touching it. The year was ending, and with it the role I had played for too long. I did not know what New Year's would bring or how far my parents' disappointment would spread, but I knew one thing with certainty. I had stepped out of the kitchen and there was no going back. January arrived with cool mornings and quiet evenings, a rhythm I had not felt in years. At the office, my work thrived. New contracts came and colleagues sought my advice, and I felt my own name finally taking space where it belonged. For once, I was not bracing for the next demand from Palm Beach. One Friday afternoon, Michael invited me to join a small group for dinner in Winter Park. We sat outside under strings of lights, laughing about work, talking about plans for the year ahead. When the bill came, he looked at me seriously and said he hoped I understood how much respect I had earned in the professional community. His words stayed with me long after I drove home, a reminder that my worth had never belonged to my family's approval. Still, the silence from my parents lingered like a shadow. Weeks passed with no calls, only an occasional stiff text from Mother that I ignored. Adriana continued to post photos of her glamorous life, each caption dripping with success. But I also heard whispers through Rachel that investors had begun asking questions, that some had backed away after seeing cracks in the family's perfect image. In late February, Father called me directly. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of its booming confidence. He asked if we could meet for coffee in West Palm. I hesitated, my stomach tightening, but finally agreed. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe near the water. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, his hands restless against the mug. He said my absence at Christmas had caused more trouble than I realized, that clients had left unsettled, that Adriana could not manage the spotlight without strain. His eyes met mine, then uncharacteristically uncertain. He asked if I would consider returning for Easter, just to help smooth things over. I let the silence hang between us. For years I had filled silences with service, with compliance, with yes. Not this time. I told him calmly that I would not return to their table as a servant. If they wanted me, it had to be as their daughter. He flinched slightly, as if the word daughter weighed more than he expected. For a moment I thought he might argue, but he only nodded slowly and sipped his coffee. The conversation ended without resolution, but I walked away lighter. The line had been drawn. Spring blossomed, and my world kept moving. Michael and I began spending more time together, our connection easy, steady, without judgment. Jessica invited me to her family's cookout, where no one cared how the food looked on the table, as long as everyone had enough. Laughter filled the air. Children ran barefoot in the yard, and for the first time I tasted what a holiday could be, without expectations weighing me down. By summer, I had signed my own consulting contract, a side business that allowed me to choose my projects. The freedom thrilled me. I decorated my apartment with new colors, hung framed photos from my own life, not cropped family pictures where I barely appeared. Rachel visited often, bringing small gifts and reminders that I was not alone. Autumn arrived, and with it the approach of another holiday season. Mother finally called in November, her voice softer than before. She asked if I would come for Thanksgiving. I asked if she wanted me there to cook or to sit. Her pause stretched long enough to tell me everything. I told her no. Instead, I hosted my own Thanksgiving in Orlando. The apartment filled with colleagues, friends, Rachel and Michael. The table was mismatched, the food simple but delicious, each dish brought by a different hand. I sat at the center, laughing, passing plates, savoring every bite. For once I ate while the food was still warm. Christmas came again, 1 year after the night I had walked away. I spent it on the beach in Clearwater with Michael and a few close friends. We watched the sun sink into the horizon, the sky painted in shades of gold and red. I leaned back in my chair, the waves brushing against the sand, and realized I no longer felt the hollow ache of being excluded. I had built my own table, my own traditions, my own life. When the new year approached, I looked around my living room, where photos of smiling faces hung on the walls. None were cropped, none were staged. They were real, messy, alive. And in the center of each one there, I was present and seen. If you have ever given everything to a family that refused to see you, I hope my story reminds you that walking away is not weakness. Sometimes it is the only way to reclaim yourself. Tell me, have you ever reached the point where saying no became the most powerful yes of your life? Share your thoughts below, and if stories like this speak to you, stay with us for more. Because sometimes the quietest rebellion changes everything.